Hi, and welcome to the review of the day, which is The Anarchistic Colossus by A.E. van Vogt. A.E. van Vogt. Vogt? Vogt. One of those things. He apparently liked to be called Van, at least later in life when he moved to California and added the E and the Van officially into his name. So I've got this pretty version of the Anarchistic Colossus by Pan Science Fiction. Losange, I've already said how much I like lozenges. I really do like the cover art for this one, which is in reasonably good condition by my standards. The cover art is great. It isn't credited, and I have tried going on in online databases to find out, but no one's claiming it. It's actually quite a beautiful picture, and it doesn't come up quite as well on the screen as it does in real life. But what you can see is we've got this strange structure that almost looks like a metallic jellyfish, and you can't see it well on screen, but there's another one in the background. You've got that beautiful cloudy sky above. It's a very SF type cover, and it's very relevant actually to the book in a way that I'll probably mention later. So yes, if anyone knows who did the painting for this cover, they should tell me, because it's a great cover. Now, I haven't just finished this one. I actually finished it a while back, and that's been very interesting, because my actual opinion about this book has been changing over the time that I've been thinking about it in the, I guess, 3 or 4 days between when I finished it and now. I didn't have time for a review when I finished it. So I think one of the people who really admired Van Vogt called his writing schizophrenic and erratic and fragmented, which I think is a fair assessment. Now, I always think of Van Vogt as an author that I really like, and I think that is partly because the first few stories by him, including Slan, that I ever encountered were a bit different maybe to a lot of the rest of his work. Now, The Anarchistic Colossus is one of his later books. This was published in, I'm pretty sure, 1977. So it was after he went through his Dianetic stage. His Dianetic stage, I believe, was from 51 to 61. And during that time, he mostly produced books that were mashups, or compendiums, I think they're called. No, he took stories and mashed them up. Like The War Against the Rule, for example, it was one of those, which I read last year. And quite a few of his other ones. This one feels more modern and perhaps a bit sharper as a novel than many of those fix-ups did. And it is an enjoyable read, but at the same time, it suffers from a few of those fragmentary type things. Anyhow, I think that it has a really crazily good basic hypothesis, but I'm not sure that it does. Does it or doesn't it? That's the question. So the basis in the Anarchistic Colossus is that my original thought was that it was meant to suggest that the society can live peacefully within an anarchy structure. Now, modern day thought would be that anarchy was a bad thing. After society collapses, we fall into anarchy. Anarchy has no organization and no structure, and everything about it is bad. Now, in his later life, Van Vogt was exploring different political and social structures. He did that in a few of his books. And here, anarchy seems to be his goal. And the interesting thing about that is that in his earlier books, he was often criticized for being very pro-monarchy. Absolute monarchy seemed to be the structure that he was most interested in. And in this book, we've got anarchy on Earth, but not anarchy as you or I would recognize it, and a complete and utter absolute monarchy on an alien planet, which we only learn about in fragments. And in this one, the absolute monarchy is, I think, being presented as the bad option, and it's possible that he thinks that the anarchy structure that he presents is, possibly he actually thinks it's anarchy, but I think that's very dubious, and he seems to be saying that it's a good thing, which is even more dubious if you ask me. So this is a book of questions. Now, politically speaking, anarchy, as I understand it, and it's a long time since I was interested in anarchy, but my understanding is that it advocates for a decentralized society without rulers, without official government, and without an established order. Now, to make that work, you would have to have close to 100% voluntary cooperation and agreement, as well as an animosity-free self-governance and cooperation, which, having met humanity, seems just about as likely as the sun freezing over tomorrow, and possibly just about as enjoyable. Anyhow, historically, anarchists have argued that any form of government is bad, and they, certainly in the 60s and the 70s, I think, were arguing that especially capitalism and monarchy were bad. No comment. I probably agree more with that ancient Greek, whoever he was, who said that any form of government, no matter how good in idealized form, is going to fall down the second it's run by humans, because humans are basically human. These days, anarchy is always thought of as pejorative. Anyhow, Van Vogt's postulation for anarchy is quite different. It's an incredibly stable, non-violent, organized society in which anarchy has become a way of life in some way that's kind of mentioned a few times but never goes into any depth. And this stable form of government is regulated by Kirlian computers. Now, Kirlian photography or electrography or biophotography, or a whole lot of different other names for it, was developed accidentally by a Russian called Kirlian. And he discovered that if you ran a current, I think it was, through an object, while it was exposed to photographic plates, you got this aura. Now, Van Vogt in the intro talks about it, and this introduction, I've got to say, comes across as very, very self-satisfied and self-centered, and maybe a bit wild. Anyway, he's talking down to the reader a little bit, which I don't love. And I could read this out. I kind of want to. No, I don't. But the thing he's saying, that this all evolves around the emotion alterations that the Kirlian patterns can recognize. And he's saying that all too often when science fiction writers of 1977 predict the future, they come up with something that was invented in 1967. And we have a little bit of that here. But he also seems to be saying that the Kirlian effect is the way of the future, which, since it was first discovered in the 30s, seems odd. Not really quite sure what he's on about. So in this book, there are all these Kirlian computers that basically run society. And how they do that is by having monitors everywhere, much like we have CCTV, only instead of being attached to cameras, they're attached to these Kirlian computers, which will read the person's aura and decide if they're angry or considering violence or considering doing bad stuff. So, allegedly, Kirlian computers have advanced so much that by taking an image of you walking down the street, they can decide if you're planning to mug someone. Or whatever. Anyway, this introduction is a must-read because it sets up the whole thing that the author is maybe aiming for, and without it, the first few chapters of this book might be completely mystifying, instead of only 60% mystifying, which is what I found them. Okay. And certainly this is, without a doubt, one of those books that you have to be able and willing to read along without understanding anything instantly, and the answers come paced within the fast-moving plot, or at least some of the answers do. Let's hope they do. So we start off with Chip, and he's mugging someone. Unsuccessfully, as it happens, because the person who's being mugged realized that he was going to be mugged, and he set a computer to simulate his evening walk, so when Chip hops out and tries to inject him full of something, the computer retaliates and Chip runs away. This sets up the really bizarre situation. So apparently all these young men from Earth have been out in space in a space fleet recently fighting the aliens, and they won and they came back to Earth. Only almost instantly we find out that they didn't actually win, they just thought they win, and the aliens actually defeated the fleet, hypnotized everyone on board the 8 ships, or more ships, however many ships there were. Everyone on board was actually hypnotized and had something implanted in their neural system, maybe their brain or spinal cord, something neural, in which an alien can ride. And none of this is spoilering. I will a bit at the end, but I'll warn you. None of this is spoilering because it starts right at the beginning. We've got Chip doing this thing, but then we've got this alien riding him and him watching what he's doing. And it's very layered. It's got layers. Like a parfait, or maybe like an onion, or maybe like both. Maybe someone made a parfait out of onion. It's weird. Okay. So this alien is riding inside Chip, but he can pop across to other members of the human race. And he isn't always inside Chip. He can sort of stretch his consciousness backward and forward, but it revolves around Chip or whichever other human that he's in. I believe that he can only be in humans that were on those spaceships and had this implant or something done. Anyway, this alien, by the way, is from a species known as the slewer egg or slug egg or something like that. And as one wonderful review on Goodreads noted, he's from the nobility. So this egg is from the noble class on a different planet which has an absolute monarchy. So actually he should be an ignoble, which fits because they certainly don't have any they're not bipedal, they're quadrupedal. They have a social structure and a belief about the world that is completely different to ours. And the reason the egg is hopping around inside Chip's spinal column or wherever is some sort of a game. Now think of one of our gamers modern day who spend all their time online connected to other things playing games. Well, this is the game that all these ignobility play. Exactly how it's a game is never really explained. In any exchange between our primary egg and any other ignoble, it's always talking about how they're playing a game. No game is ever really demonstrated, but I guess Van doesn't have to do that if he doesn't want to. Now, the game with Chip and humanity would appear to be finding out as much as possible about humanity before the entire world is raised in a few days, when the fleet of the egg arrives on Earth, which can only happen after it's been authorized by the egg who's riding around in Chip's spinal cord, or brain, or whatever. Yeah, there's a lot there. So Chip is, having been on the ship, has been linked into the Kirlian computers. So the Kirlian computers recognize him as a Kirlian computer, and that's how he's been getting away with mugging all these people. Now, the reason why he's been mugging all these people is obscure, and I'm not sure it's ever really explained, or if it's just there to introduce the Kirlian photography and how Kirlian computers and how they work to us. Anyway, Chip is about to be incorporated into some grand plan by Hal, and is being watched over by Hal's henchman, who's also got a name beginning with A, Hank. That's it, by Hank. But there's also all these other young men who were in space with Chip, who are wandering around. And it's all really pretty schizophrenic. All these things happen that should be plot builders, but you can't really tell if they are or they aren't, or what the plot is that they're trying to build. And conversations are had. A lot of the conversations are quite pointless and bizarre, and once again, so fractured that you don't really know what they're all about. So anyway, Chip wanders around for a while and does some stuff, and he's caught and he's disconnected from the Kirlian computers. So now if he does a crime, they're going to recognize him. Why he was ever doing those crimes to begin with, not sure. I'm sure there was a reason, at least in Van Vogt's head. And after a while, Chip is taken off to some prison. And the exact reason of why that happened, I've kind of forgotten. But once he gets to the prison, we've got this structure where people are doing bad and illegal things all the time, only the Kirlians aren't pulling them up, because apparently it's okay to assault someone if you're calm and happy while you're doing it. I feel like, I don't know what had happened there. Either Van Vogt had totally lost interest in the Kirlian side of things by now, and he was just waffling on about these excuses for how all these bad things can happen, because otherwise how can we get the plot forward? That seems like one very high possibility. Another possibility is that he thought he was actually making sense with all these excuses, but it isn't, because if we're talking about long-term stable society that's been based in this anarchy, which is only possible because Kirlian computers control it, and yes, in that case it's not anarchy, there are rulers, they just don't happen to be human. But leaving that aside, if we've got this stable society based on Kirlian computers that always get crime right, only they aren't getting crime right apparently something like 80% of the time, sooner or later people are going to get jack of that and do something about it. So, in actual fact, Van's interpretation of anarchy, in my mind, doesn't hold together at all. And I'm no sociologist, but in terms of pure logic, I feel that his interpretation of anarchy as a stable society is utterly impossible. And I don't know if he's actually proposing it as a possibility. Going by his earlier monarchy leanings, he may be presenting this as a possibility for you, the reader, to disprove and say, hey, this isn't ever going to be possible, this is ludicrous, because it is quite ludicrous. Now, as to the metallic jellyfish on the cover, they actually relate to a couple of points in the novel. Early on, Chip is being grabbed by a whole heap of techs, who are the police force, even though we don't have police force in this anarchy situation. And he's being taken up to the scout ship. These being the scout ships. And the scout ships, he's disconnected from the Kirlian computer network, which had previously recognized him as a Kirlian, and so he couldn't do anything wrong, and he could be mugging and beating up all these people. Having been disconnected up in the scout ships from the Kirlian, he's back on Earth, and weird stuff is happening. The alien ignoble keeps trying to control him, or the slug Ig, or whatever you want to call him. And the point of this control just never fits. He seems to be saying, Van Vogt seems to be saying that the Ig is collecting information on society, but it actually doesn't seem at any point to be doing that. So, yeah, again, I don't know about that. Okay, now Chip ends up in this Antarctic prison holding scheme, and then he ends up on a fishing fleet in which he can be starved legally because Kirlian computers don't mind if you're starved to death. And he's on that ship because he's being press ganged, because apparently the press gangers can get away with this for reasons. For reasons of advancing the plot, I suspect, as much as anything else. Now, in a way, I don't feel that it's actually possible to spoiler this book. So Van's that's big influence on PKD, and you can really see it in this book, I think. The writing is fractured or possibly fractal. It's got jarring sequences. It often lacks connectivity between scenes. You could mostly skim read without repercussion, because skim reading is basically reading the page without actually thinking about it or absorbing the meaning behind it. And since the meaning behind what was happening often was completely obscure, It was fine to just skim read it, let the word salad slide over your brain in the hope that it would make sense eventually, and sometimes it did and sometimes it didn't. It was still a reasonably pleasant reading experience. I was never for 1 second considering not reading it. I'll probably give it 3 out of 5 on Goodreads scale. But there's another science fiction rating scale out there that I want to investigate one of these days, and that's out of 20, and it's got 5 categories. And in that one, this book would not have fared well because the characterization is acutely lacking. In fact, we know that Chip is Chip, but he doesn't really have much of a character. What he's got is random behavior. We know that Hal is Hal because he's some... I won't say it, it's a spoiler. But overall, this book is worth reading if you are a mad keen PKD fan, or New Age, American New Age is really your thing. And if you want to read something that's claiming at least, to examine a stable anarchy society. It does have a pretty cool alien, but you have to read through a lot to get to the pretty cool aliens, so I'm not sure how much that alien mentality is going to keep you occupied for 176 pages. It took a long time to read too, because of the word salad element. Now, if you think you're going to read it, and I don't not recommend reading it, then maybe tune out here and then come back later. I still don't feel like anything in this was so strongly plotted or so definite that you can really spoil it, but here again. So it turns out that under this anarchy agreement, where you can't have anyone in charge, and you can't have policing, and you can't have government, and you can't, but you do need someone who's protecting Earth from all the bad aliens out there. And that's Hal. Apparently, when he was a young man, an older guy picked him out of the crowd and said, hey, you're going to be the next, not leader, not warlord, not organizer, not policing force, but you're going to be totally responsible for making sure that Earth has got defense against aliens. Chip, obviously, is going to be the next one. Because why else would you have to put up with Chip for over 170 pages? And anyway, Hal was responsible for having all these ships that could go off to fight the Ig. And Hal was somehow the Deus Ex Machina who figured out that all these young men had come back brainwashed, except it hadn't worked on some like Chip. Chip apparently wasn't brainwashed. It's nearly impossible to tell that from Chip's behavior, but there you go. Van Vogt tells us he wasn't. Of all the people on board who the hypnotism and the brain implant didn't work on, there were Chip and a few of others. Chip and maybe 1 or 2 others were smart enough to figure out that they had to pretend to be like the others. Divergent! Happens in the Divergent movie too. Anyway. But most of the others who it didn't work on weren't that smart, and they were killed off. Oh yes, as part of this anarchy society where no one is forced to do anything, apparently it's okay to sell your sons into slavery at age of 16 and send them off forcibly to fight for Earth. This is possibly the most loose and erratic interpretation of anarchy I can imagine. None of these 16-year-olds picks up a gun and shoots a person who's selling them to the army in the head. That will be anarchy. Okay, now at the last minute when Chip is locked in battle with the ignoble slug to prevent their fleet razing Earth to the ground, which they're on the way to do, Hal and his mate, psychologist mate, are press-ganged onto these same fishing boats that Chip was previously press-ganged onto, despite being the grand foobar of everything. And Chip kind of defeats the Ig and his head to make him not raise the Earth. How does he do this? Excellent question. It seems to be something along the lines of Chip takes him on this vast I don't know, scenic route of the solar system and convinces him that all life forms are really brothers under the skin. Now, they don't sit down and sing Kumbaya quite, but I feel it was a very close thing. And reading this experience was like nothing so much as that first time you watched 2001 The Space Odyssey and all those colours started flowing through the screen for the next 15 minutes and you're sitting there going, what am I meant to get out of this? A migraine? Is there a meaning? Well, at least that's what happened to me. I watched them with that when I was about 12 or 13, and all the colours did nothing for me. The Chip and Ig voyage through the solar system made no sense to me either. The fact that it worked, and Ig suddenly decided that he was the brother of all other species which they'd been happily raising to the ground for years, and that broke him up a little bit, made no sense. Much the way the anarchy made no sense. Anyhow, Ig has been rid of his belief that all other species need to be eradicated. He sinks into the commander of the fleets on his way to raise Earth and frantically tells him to stop, only to discover that he wasn't going to do it anyway because the slug Igs that aren't noble and who are subjugated to the nobility have decided that Earth's anarchy is so superior to theirs that they're going to institute it. They've copied these Kirlian computers' aura photography and they've installed them on the home world of Ig to take down the nobility. Sure. Just sure. Anyway, there's a lot here. What can I say? The funny thing about this is that while I was reading it, I was thoroughly bemused by it a lot of the time. And I did like individual bits, but after reading a paragraph which you quite enjoyed, you then tried to make it make sense in the whole story and it didn't always work. Oh, by the way, there's a couple of interesting nods here to future, I don't know, gender stuff, race, ethics. One of the main characters is black, basically. And a girl actually has some power over life, such as being able to ask a man to marry her. So it's a bit naff, but it's a bit of ahead of its time in terms of race ethics and gender ethics. Or you could argue that, at least. It might be worth it for some people for that. What else can I say? Yes, so while I was reading it, I was bemused and confused and intrigued. I was really annoyed at the reading, just confused. And having put it down, I was thinking about it a lot. So I'd read a chapter, I'd put it down, I'd go off and do other things, but I was still turning it over in my head. So there's a lot to be said for a book that makes you think about it while you're not actually reading it. And in the course of the last few days since I finished it, I've been thinking about it even more. I'm reading another book, and that's fine. But it certainly made me re-examine Kirlian photography, aura photography, which, by the way, is not really scientific. Kirlian photography is, though, and it seems to be tied up with a whole heap of other things that are used in imaging medicine. So electrography and so forth. Is it a good book? Yes, I think it is. It's a good book because it made me think. It's certainly got its own style. It's consistent throughout. I would argue that characterization is lacking and the plot is wafty and the world building is unlikely and often inconsistent. Often very inconsistent. However, for all of that, there's a lot to it. And I think anyone who likes reading classic science fiction should read it. And I think that anyone who likes A. Van Vogt in general will probably be very happy with this one. A few people who don't like Van Vogt might also be very happy with them. I am medium happy with it. I'm glad I read it. It might be quite a few years before I revisit it. But it has definitely made me rethink anarchy and what it means today and what it may have meant back in 1977. Thank you very much for watching this review. I appreciate your watching. all the way through too. I appreciate any comments that might come my way. I hope you have a great day. I hope you read good books. Bye.